In March of 2002, winter had not yet fully released its grip on rural Pennsylvania. The kind of late-season cold that settled into the valleys and refused to leave, where mornings broke grey and evenings arrived early. For Karen Thompson and her daughter Rachel, both residents of the small borough of Clarion, the plan for that Friday evening was simple. Karen needed to drive to Pittsburgh to pick up furniture she'd purchased from a cousin, a dining table and chairs that wouldn't fit in anything smaller than her Chevy Suburban. Rachel, 19 and home for spring break from community college, had agreed to come along for the company. The drive was just over an hour each way. They told Karen's husband Tom they'd be back by 10, 11 at the latest. Nothing seemed unusual about the trip. Nothing suggested finality. They left Clarion around 6:30 that evening, the Suburban's taillights disappearing down Route 68 as Tom stood in the driveway. The plan was straightforward. Take 68 to Interstate 80, follow it southwest to Pittsburgh, load the furniture, and return the same way. Karen had made the drive dozens of times. She was careful, methodical, the kind of driver who checked her mirrors religiously and kept her gas tank above half. Rachel had her cell phone fully charged. They'd call when they got there, call again when they left. It was March 15th, 2002. No one knew this would be the last time Karen Thompson's husband would see her alive. No one knew that the simple errand, the kind undertaken by thousands of families every weekend, would end differently than planned. Friday passed without issue, at least as far as anyone in Clarion knew. Saturday came and went quietly. By Sunday morning, when Tom Thompson woke to an empty house and an unchanged bedroom, concern began its slow crawl into worry. He'd fallen asleep on the couch Friday night, assuming they'd been delayed. When he woke after midnight to silence, he'd checked his phone. No missed calls. He'd tried Karen's cell. It rang through to voicemail. He told himself they'd decided to stay overnight in Pittsburgh, that Karen's cousin had convinced them to wait until morning to drive back. But Karen would have called. She always called. By Sunday afternoon, Tom was on the phone with Karen's cousin in Pittsburgh. The conversation was brief and clarifying in the worst way. Karen and Rachel had never arrived. The furniture sat untouched in the cousin's garage. No, she hadn't heard from them. Yes, she'd been home all Friday evening, waiting. The calls that followed came quickly. Tom to Rachel's friends, to Karen's sister, to anyone who might know something. Each conversation ended the same way. No one had seen them. No one had heard from them. By Sunday evening, Tom Thompson walked into the Clarion Police Department and filed a missing persons report for his wife and daughter. The initial response was measured, procedural. Officers took down descriptions, asked standard questions about the relationship, about money troubles, about whether Karen or Rachel had seemed upset or unusual in the days before. Tom answered each question with growing frustration. No, there were no problems. No, they wouldn't just leave. No, Karen didn't have another bank account or a reason to run. She was picking up furniture from her cousin. That was all. The officers nodded, took notes, and began the process. Phone records were requested. The route was mapped. Hospitals between Clarion and Pittsburgh were contacted. By Monday morning, patrol cars were driving Route 68 and Interstate 80, looking for a white Chevy Suburban with Pennsylvania plates, looking for any sign of an accident, a breakdown, a reason two people would vanish between point A and point B. And still, there was nothing. The investigation expanded quickly in those first weeks, consuming resources and attention with the urgency that missing persons cases demand. Phone records came back showing Karen's cell phone last pinged off a tower near the intersection of Route 68 and Interstate 80 around 7:15 that Friday evening, exactly where it should have been if they were following the planned route. After that, nothing. No more pings, no calls made, no calls received. Financial records showed no activity on Karen's credit cards after Thursday afternoon. Rachel's debit card remained untouched. There were no ATM withdrawals, no gas station charges, no electronic trail whatsoever. Traffic cameras along Interstate 80 were reviewed frame by frame. The resolution was poor in 2002, grainy and colorless, But investigators watched anyway, looking for a white Suburban among the hundreds of vehicles that passed through that Friday evening. Nothing definitive emerged. A few possibles, a few maybes, but nothing that could be confirmed as Karen's vehicle. Search operations began systematically, focusing first on the most direct route between Clarion and Pittsburgh. State police drove every mile of Route 68, then I-80, looking for skid marks, debris, any indication of an accident. Shoulders were examined, guardrails were checked for fresh damage, overlooks and rest areas were canvassed. Cadaver dogs were brought in and walked along stretches of road where the terrain dropped steeply away from the asphalt, where a vehicle might leave the roadway and disappear into trees or ravines. Every possible explanation was placed on the table and examined. Had they been in an accident serious enough to send the vehicle somewhere invisible from the road? Search teams walked wooded areas and checked culverts. Had they broken down and accepted help from someone with bad intentions? Investigators interviewed sex offenders along the route, checked alibis, found nothing. Had they voluntarily disappeared, started over somewhere new? Tom Thompson's finances were scrutinized for large withdrawals. Karen's computer was analyzed for evidence of planning or secret communications. Rachel's friends were interviewed about her state of mind, about whether she'd expressed wanting to leave. Each theory was pursued until it collapsed under its own weight. There was no evidence of foul play, but there was also no evidence they'd chosen to vanish. The case existed in a terrible middle space where no explanation fit cleanly. By late April, the active ground searches were scaled back. The manpower couldn't be sustained indefinitely, not without new information, not without a credible lead pointing to a specific location. The case transitioned into that liminal state where it remained open, but no longer active, where detectives still carried it, but devoted most of their time to newer cases with fresher trails. Tips continued to come in. Someone thought they saw a woman matching Karen's description at a gas station in Ohio. Someone else reported a vehicle similar to the Suburban abandoned in a field near Erie. Each tip was investigated. Each led nowhere. Media coverage had been substantial in those first weeks. Karen and Rachel's photographs appeared on local news broadcasts, in newspapers, on flyers distributed throughout Western Pennsylvania. The images showed them as they were. Karen at 43, with shoulder-length brown hair and a slight smile. Rachel at 19, with her mother's features and her father's eyes. The public responded with sympathy and attention, but without new information. That attention inevitably shifted elsewhere. By summer, the story had faded from headlines. By fall, it was referenced only occasionally, usually on anniversaries or slow news days, as one of the region's lingering mysteries. For Tom Thompson and the extended family, time moved differently. The absence that had arrived that March weekend became permanent furniture in their lives, something they navigated around daily. Karen's belongings remained in the house exactly as she'd left them. Her toothbrush stayed in the holder. Rachel's room went untouched. Her college textbooks still stacked on the desk where she'd left them before spring break. Tom saved every voicemail Karen had ever left him, playing them back late at night when the silence became unbearable. Birthdays passed without celebration. Christmas became an exercise in endurance. Karen's sister organized annual vigils on March 15th, gathering in Clarion's town square to keep the case visible, to remind people that two lives remained unaccounted for. The crowds were substantial the first year, smaller the second, diminished by the third. Investigators returned to the case periodically, pulling the files during slow periods or when new technology offered fresh possibilities. By 2005, GPS tracking and cell tower triangulation had improved significantly, but the technology hadn't existed in Karen's phone to leave the kind of detailed trail that might help. In 2008, a detective named Sarah Michaels took a particular interest in the case, spending her off hours reviewing every document, every interview, every search map. She became convinced the vehicle was in water, a pond, a lake, perhaps a flooded quarry. The sudden cessation of the cell phone signal suggested something catastrophic and immediate. The complete lack of physical evidence on the roadways suggested the Suburban had gone somewhere contained, somewhere it could remain hidden. She identified 12 bodies of water within 10 miles of the last known cell tower ping and organized volunteer dive teams to search them. It took 3 months. They found nothing. By the 10th year, something fundamental had shifted in how the case was discussed. It was no longer when we find them, but if we ever know what happened. This was not grief with a beginning and an end, not the kind that could be processed and eventually healed from. This was suspended animation, a permanent state of not knowing that prevented closure and demanded daily endurance. Tom Thompson, now in his 60s, had stopped actively searching but had never moved from the house he'd shared with Karen. He maintained her cell phone number, paying the bill month after month in case she ever called, in case the phone ever rang with an explanation. Rachel's friends had graduated college, started careers, gotten married, had children of their own. In photographs from 2002, Rachel was frozen at 19, would be 19 forever in the collective memory, while everyone around her aged normally. The quiet surrounding their disappearance became its own presence, suffocating optimism without making noise. And just when the absence felt permanent, when the case seemed destined to remain unresolved, the quiet was about to break. By 2020, the Thompson case had faded into institutional memory, the kind of file that veteran officers referenced when training new recruits about the frustration of cases that simply vanished into silence. 18 years had passed. Tom Thompson was 71, still living in the same house, still waiting for an answer that seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive. The original investigators had retired. Technology had evolved beyond recognition. The world had moved forward while Karen and Rachel remained suspended in March of 2002. That changed on a piece of undeveloped land in Venango County, about 8 miles east of where Route 68 met Interstate 80. The property belonged to a commercial developer who'd purchased it in 2019 with plans to build a small warehouse complex. The land was largely wooded, bisected by a seasonal creek that swelled during spring runoff and dwindled to nothing by late summer. In February 2020, before construction could begin, environmental surveys needed to be completed. A team arrived to assess wetlands and waterways to determine what permits would be required and what restrictions might apply. The crew was working near the creek bed, taking soil samples and mapping drainage patterns, when one of the surveyors noticed something irregular in the water. The creek was running high that week, fed by snowmelt, and where it widened into a natural depression, something large and metallic reflected dully beneath the surface. At first, they thought it might be an old farm implement, the kind of agricultural debris that littered rural Pennsylvania in forgotten corners. But as they approached, the shape became clearer. Too smooth to be a plow, too large to be a barrel. One of the crew waded into the water, which reached his thighs, and brushed away sediment from what appeared to be a curved metal surface. It was a roof, specifically the roof of a vehicle. Work stopped immediately. The Venango County Sheriff's Office was contacted. Deputies arrived within an hour, followed by a state police dive team by late afternoon. The vehicle was almost entirely submerged, sitting in roughly 8 feet of water where the creek had carved out a deep pool. Silt and 18 years of organic debris had partially buried it, and aquatic vegetation had grown across its surfaces. The dive team attached cables and a tow truck was brought in. The extraction took 3 hours, the vehicle emerging slowly from the creek like something prehistoric, water streaming from every opening, mud clinging to surfaces that hadn't seen sunlight since 2002. Even covered in sediment and decay, its identity was unmistakable. A Chevy Suburban. White paint still visible beneath the grime. When the license plate was cleared of mud and the number was run through the system, it came back immediately. Registered to Karen Thompson of Clarion, Pennsylvania. Reported missing March 15, 2002. The families were notified that evening, told only that the vehicle had been found and that remains were inside. Tom Thompson received the call from Detective Michaels, who'd retired from the force in 2015 but had asked to be informed if the case ever broke. She drove to his house personally rather than delivering the news by phone. After 18 years, the question of where they were had been answered. The harder question, why the vehicle was there, how it had gotten into a creek miles from any major road, would require forensic analysis and patient reconstruction of a night that had ended nearly 2 decades ago. The State Police Forensics Unit took custody of the vehicle, transporting it to a facility in Harrisburg where it could be examined in detail. The remains of 2 individuals were recovered from inside, their identification confirmed through dental records within 48 hours. Karen Thompson, age 43. Rachel Thompson, age 19. The news broke publicly on a Tuesday afternoon, leading every local broadcast and appearing in newspapers throughout Pennsylvania. The shock was substantial, but muted by time. Most people had assumed for years that Karen and Rachel were dead. The discovery simply confirmed what many had accepted long ago. What investigators found difficult to accept was the location. The creek where the Suburban had been found was less than 2 miles from Route 68, but it wasn't visible from the road and had never been included in search parameters. The property had been privately owned in 2002, posted with no trespassing signs and bordered by dense woods. There was no reason anyone would have driven there intentionally, and no obvious path that would have brought them there by accident. Detectives pulled out the original search maps and laid them alongside current aerial photographs. The creek was just beyond the boundaries of where ground searches had been conducted, falling into a gap between jurisdictions that had each assumed the other was covering it. The oversight pressed heavily on those involved in the original investigation. If the property owner had been more cooperative in 2002, if the aerial searches had extended another quarter mile, if the dive teams had included that particular waterway in their surveys, the if-onlys accumulated without offering anything useful. For Tom Thompson and the families, the revelation produced not shock, but a heavy, delayed sorrow. The absence that had defined their lives was finally anchored to a place, to specific coordinates on a map, to a creek that had held them all along. The mystery was no longer abstract. It was physical now, measurable, contained within twisted metal and silt. The forensic examination of the vehicle took 6 weeks. Every surface was photographed, every item catalogued, every piece of potential evidence preserved and analyzed. Despite 18 years underwater, enough remained intact to reconstruct what had happened. In the glove compartment, sealed in a plastic bag that had somehow remained watertight, was a receipt from a gas station in Clarion, time-stamped at 6:18 p.m. on March 15, 2002. Karen had filled the tank before leaving, purchased 2 bottles of water. The last normal transaction of their lives. Surveillance footage from that gas station, archived on outdated tapes that had been preserved simply because no one had bothered to dispose of them, showed Karen and Rachel clearly. Karen pumping gas, Rachel inside buying snacks. They looked ordinary, relaxed. Rachel was laughing about something. They got back in the Suburban at 6:24 p.m. and drove east on Route 68. For the first time since 2002, the timeline gained a fixed point and continued from there with increasing precision. Cell phone records placed them near the Route 68 and Interstate 80 interchange at 7:20 p.m. They should have merged onto I-80 heading southwest toward Pittsburgh. Instead, investigators believed they'd missed the entrance or become confused by road construction that had been active in that area during March 2002. Archived Pennsylvania Department of Transportation records confirmed that the interchange had been under renovation, with temporary signage and detours that had since been reconfigured entirely. In darkness, with unfamiliar detour signs and construction equipment creating visual clutter, it would have been easy to make a wrong turn. Following the most logical path from where Karen's phone last pinged, investigators drove the route themselves. Approximately 3 miles past the interchange, there was an unmarked side road, really little more than a gravel access path, that could easily be mistaken for a detour continuation, especially in darkness. The road led into the woods, ostensibly providing access to the undeveloped property where the creek ran. There were no barriers in 2002, no signs indicating it was private land, no warnings that the path ended abruptly at the water's edge. Accident reconstruction specialists analyzed the tire impressions still faintly visible in the creek bed and the final resting position of the vehicle. The Suburban had entered the water at a controlled speed, perhaps 15 to 20 miles per hour, consistent with someone following what they believed to be a legitimate road. There were no skid marks leading up to the water, suggesting Karen hadn't realized the danger until it was too late to stop. The vehicle would have gone nose first into the creek, which was running high that March due to snowmelt. In daylight, the danger would have been obvious. In darkness, the creek would have appeared as nothing more than a dark patch ahead, indistinguishable from shadow until the front tires left solid ground. The forensic pathology reports were handled delicately, but were ultimately consistent with drowning. No signs of trauma, no evidence of impairment, no indication of foul play. Just two people who'd made a wrong turn in the dark, followed a road that shouldn't have been accessible, and driven carefully into water they never saw coming. The vehicle had likely filled quickly, the weight of the engine pulling the front end down while water poured through the ventilation system. In the darkness and cold, disoriented by the suddenness of the submersion, escape would have been nearly impossible. This was not a high-speed crash. It was quieter than that. It would have happened without drama, without witnesses, without anyone knowing until the water made knowing irrelevant. The case was officially closed in April 2020 as accidental death by drowning. The findings were presented to Tom Thompson in a private meeting where Detective Michaels walked him through every piece of evidence, every conclusion, every answer they'd been able to reconstruct. The room was quiet when she finished. Tom asked a few questions about the timeline, about whether they'd suffered, about whether there was anything that could have been done. Michaels answered honestly, probably not, and almost certainly no. The accident had been quick. The location had been genuinely hidden. There was no fault to assign, no negligence to prosecute, just a convergence of circumstances, construction detours, missing signage, darkness, unfamiliar roads, that had sent two lives down a path that appeared normal until it wasn't. Closure did not come with relief. It came with exhaustion. The not knowing had been terrible, but the knowing was its own weight. Tom Thompson had spent 18 years imagining scenarios, hoping against logic that maybe they were alive somewhere. Maybe they'd chosen to disappear and would one day return. The truth eliminated those possibilities. Karen and Rachel had died on March 15, 2002, within an hour of leaving home, less than 10 miles from where they'd started. They'd been that close all along. In the months that followed, Venango County installed barriers at the access road and posted clear warning signs. The property developer's construction plans were modified to eliminate the dangerous dead end entirely, filling in the approach to the creek and rerouting drainage. The changes came too late for Karen and Rachel, but might prevent the same accident from claiming others. The Suburban was eventually released from evidence and disposed of quietly. Tom Thompson declined to see it, wanting his last memory of the vehicle to be its taillights disappearing down his driveway that March evening, not what it had become. Karen and Rachel's names were removed from the National Missing Persons Database. Their remains were cremated and interred together in a Clarion cemetery. The funeral, held 18 years after their deaths, was attended by hundreds. People who'd never stopped wondering. People who'd never stopped searching. People who'd carried the absence and could now, finally, put it down. Their story ended without witnesses, without sound, in darkness and cold water that kept them hidden for nearly 2 decades. It ended with a wrong turn, with a road that led somewhere it shouldn't have been able to, with March weather and construction detours and the basic fragility that underlies every ordinary day. Sometimes lives are lost not to evil or intent, but to chance, to the invisible dangers that exist in the gaps between what we know and what we assume, between where we think we're going and where the road actually leads. The creek returned to stillness, its surface betraying nothing of what lay beneath it for 18 years. To anyone passing by now, it's just another quiet piece of Pennsylvania woodland. But for those who know the story, it became something else. A reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself, that roads don't always lead where they appear to, and that sometimes the difference between arriving home and vanishing forever is a single turn, made in the dark.